Good afternoon, everyone. This is Brett Moore speaking. I'm the co-lead for the Global Shelter Cluster. Very pleased to have you all here online. We have quite a few people here today. Let me see how many. Around 20 so far. So we'll just wait for another minute or so and see if there's anyone else coming online, and then I'll introduce and then we can begin. Thank you, everyone. So, good afternoon again, everyone. Welcome you all here today, and we're very pleased to have the two coordinators involved with Syria to present on the work being undertaken there. It's been 10 years of response to the Syrian ongoing challenges to combat Gaziantep border, and also whole of Syria response for Damascus and bases based in Amman, Jordan. So without further ado, I will hand over to the presenters to begin for around half an hour presentation, and then we'll open up for questions afterward. Thank you, everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, actually. Thank you, Britt, for the introduction. It's nice here. I'm the support officer for the whole of Syria, shelter and NFI sectors. Today we will be, I hope my screen is okay for everyone. Is everyone able to view my screen?
Yes, Mace.
Okay, so basically today we will be going briefly through the whole of Syria coordination structure and basically the key trends and needs response. Then we will be going through a presentation on technical guidance through Syria Hub, and I will hand over after that to my colleague Tom, who will be presenting a brief presentation on Turkey cross-border operation. So first of all, to start off, just an overview of the current coordination system in place that's being utilized for coordinating the response in Syria. So as you can see, we operate through three hubs, Syria Hub, Turkey Hub, and NES. So basically this structure has been formulated to ensure the delivery of life-saving assistance and through the entire region of Syria. And the way the hubs were established was to ensure that the widest range of vulnerable communities are served. And as you can see through the map that's being projected here, different areas in Syria are under different control of different authorities, and thus the need to coordinate the response through these hubs. So currently the three hubs we have, the NES hub, which is located in northeast, and the other hub we have is the Turkey cross-border hub. It's located in Gaziantep. And then we have the Syria hub, which is located in Damascus. So here I'm projecting the shelter severity and PEN overview over the years for Syria. And as you can see, the number of people in need continues to increase over the years. And in 2021, it came to 5.9 million people. The shelter situation continued to deteriorate, and we can attribute that to the unavailability of adequate, affordable shelter, limited response for longer-term solutions, new challenges for communal shelters, especially with the spread of COVID-19 and the displacement that's still ongoing in areas around Syria. So as of now, we estimate that around 31% of the overall population continue to live in inadequate shelter conditions. And the most affected groups are returnees and IDPs. Here we are also looking onto the trend and severity of needs that's being projected in terms of needs for non-food items assistance. And as you can see, there was a short-lived improvement in the need for NFI assistance, but that improvement was short-lived because due to the major displacement that occurred in Northwest Syria, our PEN was revised mid-year in 2020, and it came to 4.3 million. And again, in 2021, our PEN again rose, and it's totaled up to 4.7 million. So what we can see as a general trend that continues to affect the severity of need and the number of people in need of NFI support is the economic vulnerability that's driven by COVID-19, economic situation, drop in Syrian pound, diminished income opportunities, and economic restrictions. So over 90% of families reported diminished access to NFIs, and unaffordability was the main driver for that specific aspect. Moving on, so here we look into our key response priorities and what the sector prioritizes as a response. So as you can see, our response overall objectives are segregated into emergency response and into support to communities, in enhancing resilience and community support. So under emergency response, we continue to advocate for the distribution of core NFIs, seasonal NFIs, and emergency shelters. And we have a number of different kits that we distribute depending on the season, winter seasons, summer seasons, and a number of core NFI emergency stock that we keep for emergency displacements as well. And we continue to prioritize this as the main objective for delivering life-saving emergency response through our sector. Our second objective being overall is support to community and strengthening of resilience and cohesion of vulnerable communities. We work on that by improving access to housing and related public infrastructure. So we strategize shelter repair projects, communal infrastructure repair projects to enhance that aspect. So this year, the sector aims to address around 1.7 million people with shelter repair and communal infrastructures projects. And now moving on. So here we're highlighting the key figures which cover the whole of Syria response. And as you can see, the needs are huge, and the targets are not necessarily covering all the people in need. We prioritize based on the severity, and as such, we prioritize the response, and based as well on the partners' capacity at hand. We have prioritized the following targets in terms of shelter, NFI, and winter support. So as a general gap and challenges that we face, we continue to face funding gaps as the needs at hand are huge, and we are not entirely able to respond to the entire population in need. In addition, we have a limited number of shelter partners at hand that are able to respond to the needs, and as such, that creates some challenges and gaps in response. In addition, like as this has been an ongoing humanitarian crisis for many years now, addressing the protracted needs with emergency solution is also a challenge for us. And through last year, all the COVID restrictions in place has affected the timeline for executing projects, in addition to restrictions in the market, and availability of materials has also been diminished due to the lack of movement. That in fact has also created a multiplier effect on the assessments that we conduct as a sector, because it has been very challenging to conduct household level surveys, and that in fact also affected the implementation of countrywide assessments. In addition to finding it challenging to obtain approvals with the governmental counterparts for such surveys. That in fact has also led us to face challenges in terms of targeting and beneficiary selection. And of course, the long approval process, specifically targeting shelter repair projects, have created a huge challenge for us and to the partners that aim to target beneficiaries with longer-term repair solutions. So now I'm going to present on behalf of the Syria Hub Technical Group. So this section of the presentation will give an overview of the subnational structure in place for coordinating technical guidance and some of the practices that's being utilized in the field. So just an overview. Currently, so all of these subnational focal points come together and report to the National Shelter Sector Hub. Here in specific, we are talking about Syria Hub. So currently we have 6 subnational focal points in place. And these subnational focal points structures have been established based on the geographical location and access. As you may notice, some governorates are split between 2 subnational structures. You may see here like Idlib, Deir ez-Zor, it's partially covered by one focal point, and another part of it is covered by another focal point. So that is due to the limited access. So some areas we have multiple access locations, and as such we segregate the areas under the subnational focal points in that methodology. So so one of the challenges we are facing with the subnational structure at hand is basically the structure we have it does not basically mirror what is being used by the authorities. So basically the government and most agencies don't have the full decentralization approach that we implement through our coordination mechanism. So basically for strategic decision, the subnational working group, we revert back to the national sector on the hub level for many discussions, because there are not adjacent structures at hand that are presently located in all the subnational locations that we have established working groups in. So basically, the subnational focal points are responsible to adjust local guidance and local practices to the technical standards or technical guidance documents that are produced at the national level. And they are also providing input on beneficiary selection for shelter projects and as well as HLP verification. So I'm just going to go and highlight some of the technical support and guidelines, technical support guidance currently being developed. So this list basically lists out the major guidelines that we developed as a sector, and they're all in line with our sector priorities in our HRP. And basically, the guidance are developed on a national level, and then subnational focal points are customizing the guidance based on the construction norms that are specific to each individual area, in addition to the environmental needs. So like different areas would have different materials accessible or different climates, and that automatically reflects on our technical guidance notes. So far, the most adjusted guidance document that we had was the guidance note on the rehabilitation of damaged houses. For example, in village communities, the use of wooden doors, windows is common practice. We also have noticed that there's a lack of proper sewage system in many of the rural areas. And that led the national focal points to adjust, for example, the use of connections to sewage lines, to septic tanks, and so on. So currently, as you can see, we have precautionary measures that are common for all the technical guidance document. The emergency distribution guidance, emergency support, and then the more customized guidelines, let's say, would be the guidance related to infrastructure repairs and rehabilitation of damaged houses. So now I'm projecting the different phases of assessments that are conducted for the execution and implementation and planning of the different shelter interventions. So as a practice, what we are currently using in Syria, we have the general shelter needs assessments, and these are very rapid assessments and are done basically usually when we have a cross-line mission or daily missions, and it's just used to identify the overall shelter needs based on general observation by mission members, community members, and so on. After we identify a specific area for of need, we then go ahead with the rapid shelter assessment, and through that assessment, we use it for project planning purposes before we go ahead and submit any request for approval or planning. So basically, we do it to assess if the areas that we have identified as a need can be targeted for the planned shelter intervention at hand. So it's going more into details at the number of people in need, the suitability of implementation of the shelter support project that we plan. After that, the project proposals are submitted for approval, and then we move on for a detailed technical assessment once beneficiaries are selected, and basically that requires technical staff to go into the details of what's needed for specific shelter interventions for each of the beneficiaries and develop the needed technical specifications for each specific beneficiary's intervention. So here I'm projecting some of the piloted environmental practices that are being utilized in Al-Hol camp. So Al-Hol camp is located in northeast Syria, and it's very much secluded from any services like electricity, water, and so on. So some of the interventions that are being piloted in that specific region is the use of solar power for different interventions. So as you can see here, this is the first time that these specific interventions are being used in Syria. So for example, the use of road solar poles that are self-charging are being used around the camp because there's no access to electricity. So the most important locations in the camp are being lit with this intervention. And then moving on, we have some also examples of how community facilities are being eliminated as well in the camp. And then there's also this first pilot where there's solar recharging stations being introduced into settlements locations for camps residents to basically charge their fans, their mobiles, and any electrical equipment. And so with this, I conclude my presentation, and I will hand over to my colleague, Tom.
Great, thanks very much, Mays. So what I'll do is just talk a little bit about Northwest Syria, and I'll show some photographs of the current situation and some of the response options that we currently have. I'll talk a bit about the current overview and the cluster setup, and then also a couple of the major advocacy challenges that we're dealing with at the moment in the Northwest Syria hub. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. Yes. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a very small enclave within Syria in the northwest along the Turkish border. So this can be accessed from Turkey, and currently there's a UN resolution, which I'll talk about a bit later, but the UN resolution allows cross-border access to areas in the northwest of Syria. And this is the situation that we're talking about. So there are about 4.4 million IDPs in this area. There are about 1.6 million IDPs who are living in a variety of informal settlements. We should say that there are about 1,400 or so camps, but there are only about 100 planned camps. So the majority of the IDPs are living in a variety of informal settlements. The shelter pin is about 2.2 million, and so those are some of the targets that we have for the cluster there as well. About 700,000 for shelter, and then the NFI pin is about 1.65 million, and we're targeting about 1.4 million. And there's something in the chat. The presentation is not active. Can you all see the presentation?
We can see it, Tom. You're on page 21 with the map.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Tom.
Okay, great. So what I'll show now are some of the just some of the pictures of the current situation, and then we'll talk a bit more about those later. So you can see that obviously winter is a major recurring annual issue, particularly for people in inadequate shelter. There are very significant flood events on an annual basis as well in northwest Syria. We're dealing, as I mentioned, with a large number of self-settled camps, about 1,400 self-settled camps in a variety of situations, but increasingly, as you can see there, in agricultural lands. We're also dealing with these settlements that are quite extensive as well. And so the largest of the camps in northwest Syria, which is also the first, is Atme camp, and that's more than 100,000 people. There are about 30 different camps which are kind of merged into one in Atme camp. So we're dealing with fairly large, sprawling camps, as well as quite small, dispersed ones too. There's also a substantial proportion of people who are living in unfinished buildings and collective centres and what remains of apartments and so on. And I think that the last shelter living conditions assessment showed that about 45% of people are living in conditions like these. Of the people who are living in camps, one thing that's of ongoing concern is that there's conflict-induced displacement, but then there's also the threat of natural hazards too, particularly from flooding, and then of course it gets extremely hot in the summer. So really, northwest Syria has everything from conflict to displacement to natural hazards to the difficulties of working across border. In 2020, there was a very substantial additional displacement as the front lines changed, and there were approximately 1 million more people who came into northwest Syria, and the shelter cluster had to respond to those. So in 2020, they reached about 1.3 million people with shelter and about 2.6 million people with NFIs. And that's the magnitude of the winter response. So it was actually 1.6 million people that were reached with winterization assistance over the course of 2020 and 2021. And that was across the 37 districts in northwest Syria. In 2021, so far, we have about 56 active partners. The cluster itself is a collaboration between UNHCR as the lead and CARE as the co-lead. On an average, it's difficult to say, but on a sort of we estimate that on a sort of a more stable year, the overall budget for the cluster will be about 90 million, although this was significantly higher last year with the additional displacement. And so what I'll show now are some images of some of the shelter solutions that are currently being implemented in northwest Syria. There's been a major discussion around dignified shelter, and we were recently able to publish a paper called the Dignified Shelter Conceptual Framework, which has been under discussion in the cluster for a number of months now, and that was finally signed off and agreed upon by all the different parties. And what that tries to do is to address a question I think May's raised in her presentation, which is about what does humanitarian shelter look like in a situation of protracted displacement, and that so much of what's been done for so long has been around repeated emergency interventions. But how do we beef those up? How do we ensure that they are appropriate to situations where people have been displaced for 10 years or more? So this was the kind of the discussion, and these are some of the interventions that are currently being practiced in order to do that. So there's a big push at the moment around site improvements. You can see there some drainage improvements, and the current standard allocation, which is one of the largest in the standard allocation's histories, actually has that as a focus, integrated site improvement between the different clusters. Again, you can see here drainage, gravelling, road improvement in camps. And again, you can see some before and after shots here of the impact of drainage and road gravelling on some of the camps. There's been an additional push around site planning, around the installation of the refugee housing unit, the RHUs, as well, and that's been very useful in trying to extend integrated site planning to other camps as well. One of the things that we wanted to show you here was a couple of last images around what people are beginning to do for themselves, and they're moving beyond the emergency interventions. They're moving beyond tents, taking things into their own hands. In some cases, tents are being sold, and alternative solutions for shelter are being implemented with the funds from the sale of those tents. And so we see here improvised local solutions, often being built on the base, on the gravel base, or on the concrete foundation of some of the tent and RHU installations. This is an image from Asme camp, and again, what we wanted to show here really was a question of transition, and that for the Asme camp was the first of the camps, so it's been there for about 10 years, and people of their own accord are beginning to move away from tents, and you can still see some tents in this picture, towards more longer lasting shelter solutions. And so those are the sorts of things that we needed to talk about within the cluster, and to find some ways of supporting some of those local solutions for more protracted displacement. A major issue that we're facing at the moment is to do with the UN Security Council resolution, which comes up for renewal in the middle of July. The humanitarian response in northwest Syria relies upon the Security Council resolution for its legal legitimacy, and that particularly affects UN agencies and also UN common funding pools that are managed by the UN. And we're not at all sure that this is going to be renewed in July, and there are significant concerns about that. So at the moment, we estimate that about half of the funding that we receive from the cluster comes via UN agencies and also through the pool fund. We estimate that about 68% of the funding for local NGOs comes via UN agencies and the pool funds. And if the resolution doesn't go ahead, then we'll be able to assist significantly fewer people in northwest Syria. So 1.7 million people, we won't be able to assist them if we don't have that access and those funds. An additional concern, of course, is around the impact of the non-renewals resolution in terms of the legitimacy of agencies that continue to operate in northwest Syria, and whether or not they would be their access and their safety would be guaranteed in the absence of a resolution. So that's a major concern, a major preoccupation of the northwest Syria cluster at the moment. And I think that's it really. It's just a bit of an overview of the current shelter conditions, the current response, and some of the bigger issues that we're dealing with within the cluster. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. So with that, we conclude our presentation, and we'll open the floor for any comments, questions. Please, anyone who's had anything to say, please go ahead. Yes, Britt, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mace, and thanks very much, Tom. That was a really fascinating presentation, and I know that you had to kind of rush it a bit, and my apologies. I know that it probably could have gone for a long time. There's a huge amount of information and detail there. I've just got a quick question for both of you to maybe begin the question and answer session. Mace, I noted, in the presentation that, when you spoke about the challenges, the challenge that you listed as number 5 was really around kind of data gathering and verification and gaps in data and how that have been compounded by COVID. Can you maybe explain a little bit from your side, how did you approach that remotely? How did you kind of manage this data gathering process remotely when there was little on the ground verification that could be done? What extrapolation, what kind of assumptions were made? And then for Tom, I've got a question around the site planning. I know it's been a challenge that we've discussed, with you on more than one occasion, and largely because of the land issues, ownership issues, permissions, but also, flat land and people are building informally in areas that are otherwise unsuitable. Can you maybe describe a little bit about some of the processes in place to think through to get better planning outcomes and how that's having a benefit? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Britt. So I think for the part on assessments and information management, I will hand over to our information management officer to explain further on our data extrapolation methodology and how we work around that remotely with the 3 hubs. So over to you, Samir.
Thank you, Mace. Thank you, Brett, for this question. I'm Samir. I'm working as the IM officer for the whole of Syria sector. And yes, correct. And thank you for raising this issue as well. So we have the problem that we cannot go out and just do our assessment as needed, especially for shelter. And how we go around that is we try to model, we try to calculate it, of course. We model this. We have the chance every year through the MSNA, for example, where we try going through specific indicators and then analyze it also with third-party input as well from others. I think in Northwest Syria, it's a bit easier to gather data. So that's also something, but maybe Tom can talk about that on his side, because we have in Northwest Syria other assessments going on. But on the whole of Syria level, this is, of course, and remains an issue. I mean, we applied for the assessment, it doesn't work, and so we have to rely on modeling. That's what we do. Not sure if this answers your question. I'm happy to go into more detail, of course.
Just to add maybe an overview of how actually we function around information management, and Samir, feel free to pitch in. So basically, as we have highlighted in our presentation, we work through our different hubs. And in each hub, we have a designated IM officer that works closely with partners for data collection purposes and data analysis. And that feeds into our overall data for the whole of Syria. In terms of needs assessments and how we try to mitigate the challenges around not obtaining approvals or not actually having feasible assessments going on. So as we all know, we have the MSNA data collection exercise that we pitch in with OCHA as a multi-sectoral needs analysis. After that, as Samir has mentioned, we work on modeling the data and highlighting the areas of severity based on our calculations. And that provides guidance to the partners who intend to plan projects on which areas are faced with the most severity. So basically, we code the areas based on the modeling exercise that's done using the MSNA data, and we provide that data up to the sub-district level on the severity scale for each region. So we assume that each partner, once they look into implementing a specific project, will look into doing another assessment for basically verifying the findings and for beneficiary selection. So what we provide through our analysis is basically an overview of the severity is at hand and basically severity in needs and the top needs that are being reported through our needs analysis. Samir can go into the details of this if needed, and I hope we answered your questions. So with that, I hand over to Tom to explain more on the site planning issues raised.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brett. So as we speak, we actually have a floods working group, which is working specifically on this. And the working group has a site planner who's the chair and is an intercluster working group. So it looks at the different aspects of site planning, including shelter, wash, logistics. We have members in the early recovery cluster as well, and also protection. So they're coming up with a list of resources and guidance and key considerations for all the agencies that are looking at integrated site planning improvements. I mean, much of it is in the sort of the technical realm of how best to ensure that gravelling is done, how best to ensure that lighting is done, how best to ensure that that roads drain properly, all these sorts of things. But the really critical question, I suppose, is really around the HLP issues, HLP and also the topographic issues, because we're dealing in a situation where there's shrinking territory. Not a lot of it is you would describe as ideal for a human settlement. This sort of agricultural land, it's very rocky land, so there has to be a fairly detailed site analysis to make sure that that the camp can kind of be individually sort of tailored to that particular location. So standardization is very difficult in this context. Everything has to be specifically looked at and specifically tailored to the geographical location based on its soil quality and its topographics and so on. And the other issue, of course, is around HLP. So there's some land that's private land, some of it's public land. But there needs to be negotiations between the people who live there and between the agencies that are implementing around the rights to actually do that and to ensure that people are able to use the land for a reasonable period of time. And that of course takes time. We're working closely with the protection cluster as well around doing that effectively. So that's just an overview, I suppose, of the process of some of the considerations for site planning.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Mace, and thanks very much, Samir, also.
So we open the floor again for any questions. Yes, please go ahead, Baki. And hi again. I haven't spoken to you in a while.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much, Mayes and Tom, for this comprehensive presentation. I saw the funding is on top of the challenges you have listed there. Just wanted to know, as the cluster is working in 3 different hubs there, so just wanted to know how the advocacy is working there. So, and pooled fund allocations, is there any specific allocation and pooled fund mechanism in each separate hubs? Or the thing? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Baki. So basically, yes, we have pool funds for specific locations and for the hubs in specific. And the way we work by providing the whole of Syria figures is to provide an overview of the budget needs and to further advocate and present what we are working on overall. In addition, as you can see, like for Damascus-based hub, we cover most of the areas that are under government-controlled authorities. So we work with trying to access funds directly for that target. And Tom can add in on some of the pool funds available for cross-border Turkey operation. And in light of the border resolution and how that affects our pool funds as well.
Yeah, thanks, May. So there is a separate pool fund for Northwest Syria, and there's so it comes under the overall direction of the Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for Northwest Syria. There was a combined pool fund recently of about 90 million, making it, I think, one of the larger of the UN pooled funds. And the reason for the size of the pooled fund was simply because of the uncertainty around the resolution in July. So they wanted to try and do as much as possible and implement as much as possible before July. And the focus of this was around site improvements, and I think that's I think one of the successes, I suppose we might say, from the cluster side, that successive members of the cluster, successive coordinators have advocated around the importance of site improvement. And that was finally recognised in the pooled fund with a fairly significant allocation for that. However, it may be one of the last pooled funds. We're currently discussing about the possibility of a subsequent pooled fund, which would be probably towards the end of June, which would look at winterization and have winterization as a priority. But there is obviously, as you can see, a rush here to kind of get activities done and money out the door and things implemented and indeed pre-positioned before the resolution comes up again in July.
Thanks, Tom. So anybody else would like to come in with a question?
If I may, Tom, just following up on what you were just discussing, this is Angel from the Global Shelter Cluster in Geneva. It's one of the strange cases where you actually have technical site planning capacity in the cluster. So can you please explain a little bit, what has been the impact, the positive impact in your specific cluster of having this dedicated capacity, and not just for the cluster itself, but for the members?
Thanks, Angel. Yes, so we have a site planner within the cluster, Andrea Chipa, who's seconded to the cluster from IOM. Having that resource enables us to engage with the partners, in a much more effective way. It enables us to promote site planning. It enables us to have a focal point for some of the other technical clusters as well, particularly WASH and particularly early recovery, with their focus on roads and infrastructure, and particularly logistics. So that helps a great deal with working with the partners, with supporting their projects. So we've been through a massive process at the moment of developing projects which could be submitted to the standard allocation or the pooled funds. And Andrea was able to work very closely with the agencies around their projects and what they should do and what the technical parameters are, and also to engage with some of the other clusters around that. So it's been a major support to the cluster, and also to having this conversation around more integrated, more settlements-based programs as well. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's been a terrific resource, and something that we're very keen to continue.
Thank you, Tom.
Yes, Miguel, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Miguel Urquia from the Global Shelter Cluster. Thank you very much, Mais and Tom, for the fantastic presentations. Very, very interesting, and the photos are particularly appreciated. It's incredible to see the size of the camps there, and well, all the challenges that you have mentioned and explained, and also all the good work being undertaken by the colleagues. I have a couple of questions. I know that, of course, for many years, the Turkey hub has been almost a kind of the maximum of remote management, no, and working with local partners. I would be interested after these years of experience in such a exceptional situation. Anything that you would like to share on maybe lessons learned or good practices or issues that you think are of interest to others on remote management and working remotely with partners? I mean, this situation of in your case, Tom, coordinating a response where I guess you have never visited physically is quite an exceptional situation. So anything that you would like to share, any learnings that can be useful for others who perhaps are not in such extreme situation, but who may have to do also some remote management, probably because of security aspects? That's one question. And then similarly on site planning, it's a very interesting idea of having that capacity building expertise. Anything that you would like to share on that could be of interest for others? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Miguel. Yeah, look, I mean, on the remote management question, I mean, it really is a strange situation here. I mean, someone described it as remote management. It's sort of doubly remote in the sense, because so I'm based here in Gaziantep in Turkey. And most of the UN colleagues are unable to go to the field, and most of the INGO colleagues are unable to go to the field. But plus, so that's one element of remoteness, at least for us in the coordination team. Another element of remoteness is obviously to do with COVID. So while we're here in Gaziantep on the border, very close to Syria, we can't actually meet with our colleagues as well. Everyone is experiencing that at the moment, but it's a sort of an odd situation of double remoteness in a way. And for a lot of the period that I've been here, it's been working from home or from a hotel room and so on. I mean, in terms of the sort of the lessons from it, I mean, I think what's interesting in this context is really the lessons, I suppose, for localization of the response. And I think what some of the successes and what some of the challenges are in terms of that. And so the successes in terms of a local response, which is obviously so heavily reliant upon local partners who are doing the implementation, are around sort of working with them, ensuring things like the meetings that we have in Arabic, the information that we produce is all in Arabic. We have strong representation within the strategic advisory group of the cluster, and all the cluster working groups have had strong representation of local partners, and so on. We know that local partners have quite significant capacity and quite significant expertise. And crucially, they're able to cross the border more easily than international partners. However, I mean, I think that what we're coming up against at the moment is the question of the limits of capacity. So one of the problems that we're facing with the current pooled fund is that we haven't been able to get the number of the projects that we would probably have liked when it was announced, because we feel that the agencies within the cluster are at capacity, as an increasing reliance on businesses, on contractor models of implementation, and so on, which probably limits the reach of those agencies. There's I would say an absence at the moment of international partners that can work very closely in association with local partners and can help with that scaling up of operations. We don't really have that to the degree that we would like at the moment. And so I'd say that in terms of the lessons, I mean, there are some clear lessons in terms of inclusivity, in terms of the importance of local actors and local agencies, in terms of good communications and so on. But there are also clear constraints too in this when it comes to this kind of remote situation, which is that we kind of we lack some of the resources that will be brought by a significant international presence. So I suppose those are some reflections on the issue of remote management. And then in terms of the site planning, I mean, I think the great resource of having someone like Andrea in the cluster is that he's able to engage with local NGOs and local specialists and support them in their programs and in the development of common technical guidance for all the clusters and all the NGOs, as well as working with them on their very specifically on their projects. So when it comes to site identification, when it comes to the analysis of the topography, when it comes to all of those sorts of things, I mean, he's able to work with them quite closely. In fact, on doing all of that, and I think that's a major resource for the cluster, for the agencies, and I think also contributes to the capacity building role of the cluster as well.
Thank you, Tom. So I'll open the floor for any additional questions, maybe, or comments. So I believe if nothing further, we can go ahead and close the session.
Maybe, sorry, Mais, this
Yes.
is Miguel again.
Yes.
I mean, this is such an interesting presentation that I could do many questions. I am kind of restraining myself to give the floor
Go ahead. We still have 7 minutes.
If there are no other questions, maybe I would like to ask another one myself. Because there was a comment from Tom on the limited number of international partners. First, I would like to, I realize that the situations are very different in the different hubs, but I was wondering whether there is something that the global cluster could do about it. I mean, this is a situation that has gone for a number of years, so I don't think it's new to partners, but perhaps there is a need to remind partners or encourage, or is there anything that we could help with as global cluster, or any ideas? Or I mean, I know that you are very much in touch with your focal point, Angel, who I'm sure is proactively supporting on anything, on any support from the global cluster. But perhaps there are other things that could be done, bringing not the global shelter cluster support team, but the overall cluster. I'm thinking of those international NGOs that perhaps you are missing and that you would like to have there, whether we could encourage them or maybe organize a specific event with them or something to help have the capacity, or is this something that perhaps needs to be addressed in a different way? I don't know. I wanted to see if we can help in that, and also if there's anything from my side that the global cluster could support with beyond what already Angel and the other colleagues are doing, more at a, as I said, at a global cluster scale, not so much the support team of the global cluster. Thank you.
Thanks, Miguel, and thanks very much for the offer of support. That's very much appreciated. I mean, I think in responding to that, it makes me think of the recent conversations that I've had with a number of the donors. Once the Dignified Shelter conceptual paper or conceptual framework was released, that took a lot of discussions, obviously, within the cluster, but we finally agreed to that, and that opened the door to looking at what other options for appropriate shelter in the context of protracted displacement might look like. And so we then began to contact a lot of the donors about this. I mean, not directly asking for funds, but just to raise awareness, have a discussion, talk about the general humanitarian shelter situation, and so on. And I think what was striking to me in those conversations was, I guess, a level of disengagement from the donors. I mean, I've spoken to probably about 10 or so of the different major donors. What they typically do is tip funds into the pooled fund. So with the exception of really, I think actually one donor, which was actually located in Gaziantep and had direct relationships with some of the NGOs, pretty much all of the others were remotely located, sometimes in Amman, but also sometimes in their own countries. So were removed from the context, and then also tipped funds into the pooled fund mechanism. So had I suppose relatively little direct engagement with NGOs partners, and with the situation. And so I felt that there was this kind of there wasn't the awareness, I think, at the donor level that I've seen in other disasters, partly because of this. It's not to say that Northwest Syria is off the agenda, but it does seem that knowledge of the current humanitarian situation is a lot less than would be, I think, desirable in a way. And I think that also perhaps partly is reflected as well in some of the bigger agencies. A lot of them have, I know that there were visa issues, I think, last year, and a number of agencies had to leave. But a lot of the bigger international agencies that you might see in some of the other large responses are not based here in Gaziantep, or indeed in Turkey. I mean, they're based regionally. And I think that even in the days of Zoom and Skype and virtual communications technology, having proximity is still important, and it still brings these questions to the forefront of people's minds. And I feel that it's being a little bit forgotten in the humanitarian community. So in terms of what the shelter cluster can do, I mean, I think some it would be great to have some support, I think, around raising awareness, maybe some engagement with donors, maybe some of the key NGO partners or INGO partners within the cluster. We could offer to have a briefing for them, for example, just to kind of make them aware of the situation and re-engage them in the local realities here. And I suppose even though here in Northwest Syria, we're talking about one subset of this whole of Syria issue, one enclave. We're talking about the whole of Syria. even then, we're still talking about one of the world's major humanitarian responses with significant humanitarian shelter need. Even just talking about this specific enclave. So I think it would be good to sort of remind the humanitarian communities, the donors and the INGOs and so on through the cluster about that. Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you very much, Tom. Indeed.
Miguel, is there any more questions? I know we're nearly drawing to a close.
Yes, I was just waiting to see if Miguel had any more questions.
No. I just wanted to thank for the answer. And yeah, indeed, mention that Syria is the biggest response for the last few years. So yeah, maybe there's something we could do that, and we can follow up bilaterally. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Miguel. And thanks to everyone who attended our session today. And over to you, Britt, for any final words.
Just a thanks really to Mace, Tom and Samir, and all the teams. I know there's many others online who are really just listening, but it's a huge interconnected response with many parts to it. I think we've only really just scratched the surface. We've got some details on some of the challenges, and I really appreciate the openness that you've all contributed, within this presentation. So, and also to second Miguel's comments as well, that, it is a huge response. It's ongoing. There's no resolution as yet. The needs will be ongoing for a long time. It's great to see some innovation and development in the approaches being taken. And I know that a lot more still needs to be done. Tom, you've outlined the funding gap and some of the kind of political and institutional challenges there. So I know that there's a lot more than just the implementation and kind of architectural, technological aspects that are really, that you're all confronting there on a daily basis. From our side, never hesitate to reach out. We've got many of the colleagues, representatives from other agencies, shelter practitioners, also online. We do want to encourage ongoing interest, support, participation, donor interest especially, until we can really get a more well-funded and complete response. I know COVID's been a challenge, and hopefully as vaccination rates go up, we'll be able to get more access and pass some of these more insurmountable challenges that you've been outlining. But without further ado, from my side, thanks again to you all. Thanks to all the colleagues and interested shelter practitioners online. We've had a big turnout today. I think our next, if Miguel or Angel, Renee, can you please remind me of the next country update for the same time next Wednesday? Afghanistan. And we've got Bakir. We did have Bakir online, so it'll be Bakir, and we have Patrick as well online. So we welcome them next week for the presentation on Afghanistan. Same time, same place. So thank you very much, everyone. All the best and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Britt. Thanks to everyone who participated today. And we look forward to attending the other country sessions.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all, and all the best for the afternoon.
Thank you, Mace and Tom.